Rupenhard continually touched his face in front of the mirror, a look of bewilderment on his face. The mirror reflected a boy with a naive expression and muscular build mimicking his every move. In his youth, he had black hair and black eyes, bearing a cold demeanor. He was also a pretty boy, growing into a man of distinguished charm in his older years, his romantic gray hair enchanting numerous elven beauties. Never had he ever possessed such a foolish face, not in his youth nor in his elder years. Well, upon closer inspection, the boy in the mirror wasn't exactly ugly. He was not the handsome type but rather ruggedly attractive. However, to Rupenhard, who had always been praised for his beauty, the reflection seemed no better than a common laborer. Tugging at his hair, Rupenhard was deep in thought. What in the world happened? Could the time regression spell have failed? Had he entered the body of some random person instead of his younger self? Or perhaps, this wasn't the past at all, could his soul have been transferred to someone in the future? No matter how much he pondered, without any clues, he could not find an answer. As he was agonizing over this, his eyes suddenly took on a peculiar shade. Now that I think about it, this face does seem somewhat familiar. It was odd. The face seemed familiar, yet unfamiliar at the same time, with certain features feeling strangely recognizable. Those deep brown eyebrows, the determined look in his eyes, the stubbornly closed mouth. Yes, if that body grew larger, the muscles more defined, and if a wire-like beard covered the chin. Fist King, Teslan? It was then. The door swung open, and a majestic voice solidly backed his reasoning. Teslan, you rascal. The sun is high in the sky. What are you doing, not coming out? The moment he turned his head, Rupenhard froze on the spot. Gasp! The one who shouted was an old man he had never seen before in his life. Standing at 2.5 meters tall, with muscles that seemed about to burst covering his entire body, it was hard to distinguish whether this monster was a person or a statue painted in flesh color, if one could even call this creature an old man. The old man strode towards him. Rupenhard was horrified by the muscle cloud looming over him. Although he had handled giant monsters like ogres and minotaurs with relative ease, this old man seemed to be on a different level. The monsters, despite their size, had a certain humanity to them with their adequate fat and pot bellies. In contrast, this old man was truly all square and muscle, with not an inch of unnecessary fat, sharp muscle lines throughout. If those monsters were like porous sandstone, this one was like solid granite. Rupenhard's physique, which seemed so robust and strong, appeared scrawny and gaunt in comparison to the old man, even young Teslan. This is why comparative evaluation is frightening. With dazzling white hair and a silver beard fluttering, the old man laughed heartily. Come on, let's start the day with joy, ha ha ha. Once the terror that dyed the continent in blood, the demon king Rupenhard, turned into a mouse in front of a cat, asked in a trembling voice. Who are you? Unbeknownst to him, the identity of the old man was Teslan's master and the greatest martial artist of the continent, the reigning Fist King, Gerard Chrome Protease. Gerard was preparing for another day of training Teslan, just like any other day. However, unlike usual, Teslan did not crawl out to the training ground. Infuriated, Gerard immediately ran to catch this unruly disciple. How could even a second be wasted when time is of the essence? Upon flinging open his disciple's door and entering, Gerard saw his disciple examining his body in front of a mirror. Gerard's mood instantly improved. It was truly delightful to see him inspecting his muscles so thoroughly first thing in the morning. The dedication to sculpting a more beautiful physique was commendable. Therefore, he cheerfully shouted, "Let's start the day off with joy, haha." But there was something odd about his disciple's expression. It wasn't the usual grinding teeth and fierce, fiery eyes. Who are you? HM? You're looking at me as if you don't know me today. Gerard tilted his head. His disciple spoke again. I'm asking because I really don't know. Gerard nodded as if he understood. Then he spoke kindly. Teslan, haven't you already used the amnesia excuse twice? You should know by now that it won't work. His disciple's mouth dropped open, seemingly astounded. The expression seemed quite vivid this time, as if his acting had improved significantly. Gerard clicked his tongue. However, he didn't want to blame his disciple. He fully understood that the training method of their martial school, Gym Unbreakable, was harsh. He himself had tried every possible means to run away when he was vigorously training under his master. But ultimately, reaching the peak would one feel the effects of this training method firsthand, and one would be moved by the master's profound intentions. Until then, it was the master's responsibility to forcibly guide his disciple to a higher state. Gerard immediately reached out and grabbed his disciple by the nape. Though his disciple had already grown to surpass the size of an adult man, to Gerard, who stood at 2.5 meters, 8 feet 2 inches, tall, he was still a small boy. Easily holding the back of his neck with one huge hand, Gerard said cheerfully, "Let's go to the training ground." Deep in the mountains, amidst a dense forest of broadleaf trees, lies a clearing with 2 log cabins. This secluded spot is home to the Gym Unbreakable, a martial arts sect that has produced the continent's strongest fighters for generations, though it remains largely unknown to the public. Rupenhard found himself dangling in midair, his neck gripped by an elderly man, Gerard, as if he were a kitten being carried by its mother. Despite his struggles, Gerard's muscular grip easily subdued all attempts at resistance. As a mage, Rupenhard was not one to remain silent, even in such dire circumstances. He pleaded with the old man to listen, but his pleas fell on deaf ears, Gerard's indifference as apparent as if it were the most natural response in the world. Upon reaching the clearing, Gerard set Rupenhard down and tied him to a large wooden stake in the center of the area without a word. This position, reminiscent of how prisoners are executed, filled Rupenhard with alarm. Before Rupenhard could voice his panic, Gerard gagged him with a simple, efficient motion. Looking at the terrified Rupenhard, Gerard smiled warmly and then fetched a large bamboo pole. As he prepared himself, Rupenhard's fear intensified. With a swift motion, Gerard struck Rupenhard's abdomen with the bamboo, eliciting an agonized response from Rupenhard, who couldn't scream due to the gag. The pain seemed magnified by his inability to vocalize it, leaving him shaking and looking at Gerard with wide, fearful eyes. What on earth is happening? He couldn't grasp the situation at all. And there was no time given to understand. Immediately, the whipping continued. The bamboo struck his thighs. It hurt to death, as expected. This time, it hit his side. The pain was so intense that tears formed. The bamboo from southern Halion is renowned for combining the strength of steel with the elasticity of rubber. Gerard began mercilessly beating Rupenhard's entire body with that brutal object. Gagged, Rupenhard screamed repeatedly. The beating was truly relentless, intensely covering every part of the body evenly, thoroughly, and cruelly. The pain was so intense that any thoughts of injustice or questions about how this situation came to be flew out of his mind. Cirrus. It looks like this is it for me. For a moment, he saw Cirrus beckoning him from beyond the blue sky, a mirage in full view. But Rupenhard clenched his teeth. The thought of dying after barely obtaining a second life felt too empty. Clinging onto a sticky attachment to life, he tried hard to clear his fading consciousness. I can't die. I absolutely can't die like this. Meanwhile, Gerard was puzzled. The feel of beating his disciple was a bit different from usual. Could it be described as a bit more chewy? This shouldn't be happening if he was undergoing his usual physical training through mental imagery. Is it really amnesia? It wasn't particularly surprising. The training method of Gym Unbreakable was so simple, brutish, and violent that it often led to short-term amnesia. Gerard himself had lost his memory a couple of times when he was undergoing training. And, like someone experienced, he knew the solution well. Beating will eventually cure it. The best way to restore memory was to recreate the experience from when the memory was lost. Gerard's hands became even more ferocious. Thud 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 thud. The sound of beating under the clear sky resonated loudly. It was a soul-stirring, soul-filled sound of drumming. Naturally, since the drum was filled with a soul. Save me. The Gym Unbreakable is among the most unique martial sects scattered across the continent, holding a distinctly unusual philosophy. Typically, whether one becomes a warrior, a knight, a swordsman, or a martial artist, the fundamental framework of their training remains unchanged. It involves refining one's breathing, strengthening the body, and mastering various techniques to enhance overall proficiency as a martial artist. Although the specific methods may vary greatly, leading to the emergence of different schools, the basic approach is generally similar. However, the philosophy of the Gym Unbreakable denies these fundamentals. First, create a perfect body. Gerard shouted relentlessly as he whipped mercilessly. The reason humans wield weapons is that they are weak. They wear armor because their bodies are frail, and they take up swords, spears, and axes in place of claws and teeth they lack. How foolish is that? Even while being beaten, Rupenhard found this absurd. Why would using tools be considered foolish? Gerard immediately answered. It's an escape. A pathetic escape of those who cannot overcome their own frailty. A true martial artist should strive to train and overcome their weaknesses. Rupenhard was dumbfounded, having never encountered such a simplistic and brutish way of thinking in his 50 years of living as a magician. Fortunately, the gag in his mouth prevented any reaction from being noticeable. Gerard continued speaking. So first, one must create an unbreakable, perfect, indomitable body. Even as his hand never rested from swinging the cudgel, Gerard calmly explained the philosophy of the gym unbreakable. He reasoned that repeating familiar stories might help his disciple recover from amnesia more quickly. Unlike other schools that combine physical training with skill practice, the gym unbreakable rejects this. Given the short human lifespan and the lofty realms of martial arts to be achieved, they argue, how can one reach these heights by dabbling in this and that? Truly, those who focus on digging one well will eventually succeed. Thus, they prioritize perfecting the body first. With a perfected body, skill training becomes easier as the body is at its peak activation, allowing for quick skill acquisition and reducing the time needed to correct bad habits. This is the core argument of the gym unbreakable. The first step to creating this perfect body is to turn the body into steel. Humans are like iron. Both iron and humans become stronger and more durable the more they are forged. Why are humans compared to iron? There's a serious flaw in your logic from the start, you. Ripenhard had long forgotten the fact that if his body had not been like this from the beginning, he wouldn't have ended up in such a state. Gerard, upon entering the house, fetched from the storage the item he always used. It was a gigantic bathtub made entirely of marble, big enough for a fully grown man to submerge himself completely with room to spare. Then, he filled the bathtub with water. True to his reputation as the king of strength of his era, his method of filling the tub was nothing short of impressive. While ordinary people would laboriously carry water in buckets to fill the tub, this muscular behemoth had no need for such tedious steps. He simply lifted the entire bathtub and dipped it into the pond behind the house, effectively filling it in one go. This immense object, made entirely of marble, was handled as if it were a mere washbowl by Gerard, who then proceeded to pour a drum of some liquid into it and added various herbs. He then returned to Ripenhard. Having watched Gerard's actions closely, Ripenhard asked with a tinge of fear in his voice. What is that? What else? If you've worked the metal, you need to cool it down. With a nonchalant reply, Gerard grabbed Ripenhard by the nape of his neck. Once again, he employed the mother cat carrying her kitten method. It seemed that this old man knew no other way to carry people. Indeed, a muscular old man carrying a muscular disciple like a princess could be considered a horror scene in its own right. Holding his disciple by the nape, Gerard manipulated his aura. Golden aura surged and flowed before seeping into the entirety of Ripenhard's battered body. Ripenhard groaned at an odd sensation, but even amidst the pain, he felt his body healing at an astonishing rate. He was familiar with a similar effect from previous magic, which allowed him to recognize the activation and amplification of his body's regeneration capabilities. Bones realigned, ligaments tightened, and swollen muscles returned to their proper places. In simpler terms, Gerard was currently healing and massaging his disciple's entire body with his aura. The unbreakable aura, unique to the gym unbreakable, was renowned across the continent for its exceptional ability to manipulate the physical body, possessing such healing properties. After tending to Ripenhard's body for a while with his aura, Gerard then stripped his disciple completely and placed a large funnel in his mouth. Of course, he still paid no heed to his disciple's will. Ripenhard, having no energy left to resist, compliantly accepted the funnel. After all, he had somewhat anticipated this when he saw the bathtub being filled. I mean, I could just undress myself, but why go through all this? But then again, he was in no condition to even flick a finger after being beaten to a pulp, lacking the strength to undress himself. It wasn't as if Gerard had a hobby of undressing his young male disciples for fun. Alright, then. I'll see you in an hour. Gerard submerged Ripenhard completely in the bath, then covered it with a lid. The lid had a hole big enough to breathe through, so Ripenhard, floating in the water, could somehow still breathe. He blankly stared into the water around him. At first, he hadn't noticed, but upon closer inspection, the contents were no joke. My goodness, healing potions, geril herb, petals of the fetal's flower. Healing potions are items that would cost a fistful of silver coins per bottle from any reputable mage's guild. To fill a bathtub with them? Even if the water was somewhat diluted, considering the amount of healing potion used, the cost was astronomical. There was an old story about a queen who bathed in milk for skin beauty. If she saw this, she could brag about her frugality to the whole world. Furthermore, the herbs added were also expensive, all known for their potent healing properties. Submerging in the water, he could feel his wounds healing and his body recovering at an astonishing rate. At the same time, he was acutely aware of his own resilience. This training method wasn't unfounded after all. After strengthening every muscle and bone in his body to the brink of death, then quickly healing with the power of aura and medicinal water, his body regenerated before any serious illness could take hold, becoming even more robust. After all, if Teslan could survive up to now by doing this, it really says something. Truly, even a troll could be beaten to death with this kind of strength. There was indeed a logical aspect to it that warranted acknowledgement. Of course, emotionally, it was the last thing he wanted to accept. Why, after all, did he need to go through so much to become stronger? Others seem to grow strong quite normally without such extremes. Teslan must have been repeating this kind of training for years, hasn't he? The depth of Teslan's strength, to withstand his magic became instantly clear. Sigh. A deep sigh flowed beyond his lips. The healing spring water caressed his body, gradually easing the pain. Only now did he begin to regain his senses and the capacity to grasp the situation. Immersed in the healing waters, Ripenhard quietly sank into his thoughts. First of all, it's clear that this is the past. Considering Teslan's age, it seemed he had traveled back about 30 years. He had a hypothesis about why he was reincarnated into Teslan's body. It was at the very moment the time regression spell was activated that Teslan's attack pierced through the magic, causing a surge of magical power. It likely resulted from that aftermath. Hold on. Then, what about me in this time period? Ripenhard's brows furrowed deeply. Does that mean a younger version of Ripenhard exists in this time period? Can two identical souls exist in the same space and time? According to the principles of magic, that was impossible. But then, traversing time was also supposed to be impossible by the standards of magic. The moment Ripenhard traveled back in time, those standards became unreliable. Then, the brain of a magician, who once sought the pinnacle of magic, began to spin rapidly. It seems I can posit two hypotheses, Ripenhard mused. The first hypothesis posits the coexistence of Ripenhard's soul from the future within this body and the current young Ripenhard. The second hypothesis contemplates? Could it be that the soul of Teslan, the martial king, has entered my body now? Ripenhard pondered. Even for him, a magician at the pinnacle of his art, it was impossible to definitively determine which possibility was more likely. After all, both were beyond the common understanding of magic he had learned. The issue then becomes what impact this will have on the present. He considered the scenario of having another version of himself. What would happen when two identical souls came into contact was unknown to anyone. The identity of a soul is an immutable law that constitutes the world. In the worst case, one of the souls could be annihilated. As a magician, Ripenhard was aware that he had to consider even the direst possibilities. However, it would be at least 10 years before the young Ripenhard would become an official magician. Reflecting on the past, this period was when he should have been engrossed in his studies at the Delphia Mage Tower. At least for the time being, it seems unlikely that they will affect each other. And in the second case, if Teslan currently possessed Ripenhard's body? If Teslan, too, had regressed to a past life, he would have memories of the past and could likely deduce Ripenhard's situation as well. Then, there's a considerable chance that he would target himself. Perhaps this is not an immediate problem either? Teslan's strength originated from his body, but now his body was occupied by Ripenhard. Even if Teslan remembered the zenith of his power, as long as the foundation of his body was the weak young Ripenhard, he could not immediately return to being the martial king. It will take at least a few years. Or, seeing the way training is going here, it might even be impossible in a lifetime. The training method of the Gym Unbreakable absolutely requires a mentor's help. It's not something one can do alone. No, given Teslan's level, he might still find a way to train on his own. As he continued to think, his head began to ache from the complexity. It seemed that, regardless of which hypothesis was correct, confirmation was necessary to devise a proper strategy. Anyway, for now, escaping from this hell is the priority. Ripenhard's thoughts began to fade. Continuing to think left him too exhausted. Unwittingly, he fell into a deep sleep. Exactly an hour later, Gerard fetched Ripenhard from the bathhouse. Tossing him some dry clothes, he shouted, "My disciple! Let's eat!" Ripenhard, whose body had just recovered and was now ravenously hungry, was thrilled and quickly got dressed and ran to Gerard. Despite the situation, it felt imperative to get something into his stomach, or he wouldn't be able to stand it. Entering the room, Ripenhard expected no more surprises, yet he found himself astonished again. Meal? This is it? Gerard's cooking was generous. It was truly a man's meal. Simply slicing up an entire pig and throwing it into a pot with various vegetables and grains, then boiling it all together was the entirety of the dish. Gerard handed over a ladle, saying, "Here's your spoon." Looking at the merciless mixture of liquid and solids in the pot, which was suspiciously stew-like, Ripenhard seriously contemplated whether he should eat it. Wait, is this supposed to be a serving for one? It wasn't both Gerard and him eating from this enormous pot. Gerard had already set up a separate meal for himself, consisting of bread, soup, meat, and vegetables, a normal diet that wouldn't be too much for 3 or 4 adult men. Indeed, that amount was substantial but reasonable. Given Gerard's size, no one would question him eating that much. However, the pot in front of Repenhard was on another level entirely. It seemed enough to feed an entire squad of orcs from the era of the Antares Empire, with enough left over to pat their stomachs. Was he really expected to eat all this? Would there be consequences for leaving leftovers like before? Well, let's eat anyway. Though daunted, Repenhard began eating without a word. Surprisingly, the meal was delicious. This wasn't to say Gerard had exceptional cooking skills. The saying that hunger is the best spice could be amplified hundreds of times to describe this situation. Gerard kindly explained for his amnesiac disciple. Your body has been pushed to its limits. It needs that much replenishment. Repenhard mindlessly devoured the stew. Initially doubting he could finish it alone, once he started eating, he couldn't stop. He found it absurd how he kept on eating endlessly. Is this even possible? What about the law of conservation of mass? Feeling as though the principles of magic were being defied, Repenhard finished off the pot. It was as if he was digesting the food as quickly as he was eating it. Gerard cleared away the cauldron and spoke kindly. Now, let's run lightly to aid digestion. And so, the afternoon training began. To Repenhard, who was a magician, the afternoon training seemed quite standard. First, they would run around the mountain for about an hour with heavy metal weights attached to their entire body. This was followed by a series of physically demanding exercises that were ambiguous in their ordinariness, push-ups using only fingers, crunches while holding dumbbells in the mouth, and squats while carrying boulders. The intensity was brutish, but it was understandable training, so this time Repenhard quietly followed along. Of course, he felt like he was going to lose consciousness several times in the process. However, a single word from Gerard immediately reinvigorated him. "HM? Are you struggling, my disciple? Shall we just continue with the morning training?" "No, sir." Preferring to carry boulders over being beaten to death, Repenhard's motivation soared to the skies. The sun had set, and the exhausting day had finally come to an end. After throwing the utterly worn-out Repenhard into the room, Gerard offered a night greeting with a pleased smile on his face. "Good work today, my disciple. See you tomorrow? Ah, good night, master." Yes, yes. Gerard closed the door with a content smile, and Repenhard stared blankly at him. It was a truly comforting expression, filled with love for his disciple. Looking at him, he can't be a bad person. But what good does being a nice person do if one's head is filled with vicious ideologies? "I'm escaping tonight. I'll find a way to escape no matter what." Repenhard quietly lay on the bed, waiting only for Gerard's room light to turn off. His body, exhausted to the core, screamed for sleep, but he endured it with formidable mental strength. After all, he was a mage, a profession that prides itself on unparalleled mental fortitude. Gerard's room light turned off soon after. However, Repenhard didn't move immediately. I can't carelessly move before he falls deep asleep. After struggling to keep his eyelids open for about an hour, Repenhard finally moved. He tiptoed, carefully opened the window, and moved cautiously through the yard until the building was out of sight. Since he couldn't be sure of Gerard's extraordinary senses, he dared not act rashly. And finally, when he had crossed a hill, "Run!" Repenhard dashed towards the foothills. Thanks to his thoroughly trained body, he quickly gained speed despite being overworked. He ran through the mountain path at a terrifying speed that would make any wild beast cry in envy. The irrational training seemed logical, but it meant nothing to him. He had no intention of becoming a warrior. His mind was filled with the most powerful magics of his era. He needed to become a 10th Circle Ultimate Mage once again and rebuild the Antares Empire. Was this the time to be building muscles? How long had he run? A light of irrepressible joy appeared on Repenhard's face as he ran blindly. Ah, freedom! I finally escaped. Just as a sense of relief was about to overwhelm him. "My disciple, where are you going?" A large old man was sitting on a rock ahead, smiling broadly. "Gah! This monstrous old man. When did he get here ahead of time?" Gerard looked at Repenhard, who was internally screaming, and chuckled merrily. "So you've decided to run away after all, not having done so for a month or two. Is this the 9th time? One more escape and you'll hit double digits." It was clear that Gerard wasn't surprised at all by the escape of his disciple. It seemed that Teslan also had a habit of running away frequently. Repenhard's shoulders slumped. Sigh. It was clear something had to change. This couldn't continue. After a moment of contemplation, Repenhard lifted his head. "Listen here, old man. I have something serious to say." Gerard responded calmly. "Let's hear it. I'm not actually the boy known as Teslan. My name is Repenhard. I'm a wizard." Repenhard then seriously began to share his story, explaining how he ended up in the body of this boy. It was a story that should never have been revealed. However, having already experienced hell, Ripenhard wasn't thinking that far ahead. His only concern was escaping from this place. So, that's what happened. Therefore, I cannot become your disciple. After finishing his story, Ripenhard looked at Gerard and swallowed hard. Would the old man believe his story? And if he did, how would he react to the existence of an evil wizard who had stolen his disciple's soul? Surprisingly, Teslan didn't seem shocked at all. He just narrowed his eyes and let out a small laugh. Oh, is that the story this time? What? Before, you said you were an otherworlder who came from another dimension. That you entered that body after encountering dragons and gods. And before that? Something about being a master from the legendary Eastern continent who was reincarnated here, if I recall correctly? And with a single step, he moved behind Ripenhard and suddenly grabbed his neck, lifting him up. The massive figure of 2.5 meters moved without even being seen. Truly, it was a terrifying movement worthy of the Fist King of the era. Still, this time the setting is a bit more detailed. You've improved a lot. Playing the role of a wandering bard as a hobby might not be a bad idea, my disciple. Suspended in the air, Ripenhard was frustrated. To think that even this was futile. Gerard was smirking continuously. It seemed that Teslan had been earnestly spewing similar lies for a long time. Come on, let's go back and sleep. You need to rest well to endure tomorrow's training. Ripenhard could not see even a hint of doubt in the old man's expression, carrying his disciple back, that he might not be the real Teslan. And, in fact, it was a story of little concern to Gerard. What he wanted was a robust body that could endure the training methods of the gym unbreakable, nothing else mattered, whatever it was. Damn it. Realizing this, Ripenhard despaired. There seemed to be no way out of this hell. The world was all darkness. It was the middle of the night, after all. Dangling as he returned to hell, Ripenhard changed his mind. Even though it had been just a day's encounter, he realized it desperately. That no words would work on this old man named Gerard. Words achieve nothing. Quietly returning to the log cabin, Ripenhard gritted his teeth and resolved again. I failed today, but I will definitely escape tomorrow. Yes, today's escape failed. I'll give you that. But don't think I'll continue to be trapped here. Even as he was thrown into bed, Ripenhard did not give up on escaping. He was a man who did not know how to give up even in his previous life. He didn't know how to give up to such an extent that he was called the Demon King. He couldn't give up just because of this. And the next day, yet again, the hellish morning dawned. Ayaha! Above the clear mountain sky, the boy's scream sorrowfully echoed yet again. 2 months later. The man called the devil for his indomitable spirit, Ripenhard, eventually abandoned the thought of escaping. Gerard's surveillance network was so persistent that it even made him abandon his lifelong beliefs. Moreover, even if he managed to escape by luck, given that man's personality, it was obvious he would be pursued to the ends of the continent. He would be caught and returned anyway? It's better to formally ask for permission to leave the mountain. Fortunately, he remembered what level of mastery the future Teslan had achieved and had confirmed that the future Teslan was indeed alive. That meant, without a doubt, his body could endure this absurd training method and survive. Not just survive, but attain the lofty realm of martial arts, becoming the strongest fighter of the age. On reflection, it wasn't a bad deal at all. Knowing for sure that he would reach such a state in the future, enduring this level of hardship seemed insignificant. Of course, this did not mean he had given up on the path of magic. Wouldn't a healthy, muscular wizard be better than a frail one, after all? Having changed his mindset, Ripenhard decided to take Gerard's teaching seriously. Well, there wasn't much about being serious or not. It was just about closing his eyes, gritting his teeth, and enduring the beatings. Besides, that old man isn't really a bad person, after all. Another reason Ripenhard changed his mind was because of the way Gerard treated him. Gerard sincerely and genuinely cherished and loved his disciple. He was truly dedicated to educating Ripenhard, albeit with a rather unsophisticated method of training. However, his eyes were always filled with affection and concern for his disciple. This devoted affection was something Ripenhard had never experienced before. Magicians would make a big deal out of teaching even a single line of magic to their apprentices. To learn even the most basic first circle spell, one had to serve their master like a slave for at least 3 years. In contrast, Gerard would even take care of his disciples' needs. He cooked meals, though it's debatable if it could be called cooking, and cleaned. If there was energy left to clean, Gerard would rather have Ripenhard take another hit or lift a rock one more time. Moreover, there were no tuition fees. Gerard generously spent his own money on Ripenhard's education, covering the costs for meals and bathing water, which must have amounted to an astronomical sum. Ripenhard had once boldly asked Gerard what he expected in return for doing all this. Gerard responded with a look that questioned the absurdity of the question. A master is like a parent. Isn't it natural to give everything to a disciple who is like a child? This was unimaginable in the relationship between magicians and their apprentices. For Ripenhard, who grew up an orphan and spent his childhood under a magician, this affection was both burdensome and oddly comforting. Thus, he sometimes thought of running away but would then remember Gerard's eyes, his expressions, and decide against it. Indeed, Gerard had his reasons. He had finally found his successor after 30 years. The so-called Jim Unbreakable had lost more than a dozen disciples to his brutally unsophisticated training methods in the early days. Therefore, it was natural for him to cherish the disciple he finally obtained. This cherishing manifested in excessive violence, which was Ripenhard's sorrow, but regardless, Gerard was sincerely loving his disciple. There was no doubt about that. Thus, 2 years passed in this hell filled with love. Today, Ripenhard was again tied to a stake, taking his punishment. Shedding the vestiges of boyhood, his physique had undergone a transformation, now vastly different from 2 years ago. Bamboo strikes felt refreshing rather than painful to him now. There was no longer a need for a gag. His jaw strength, honed to perfection, could chew through any gag presented to him. However, that did not mean the current physical training was painless. Gerard was now using a steel mace instead of bamboo to beat his disciple. Gritting his teeth, Ripenhard focused intently on the image of physical strengthening, along with the unique breathing technique. Practicing this continuously amidst the beating somewhat alleviated the pain. Suddenly, an unusual sensation surged throughout his body, an experience unlike any before. A powerful energy burst from his lower abdomen, swiftly coursing through every limb 100-fold. Filled with this energy, an unimaginable strength enveloped him. Unknowingly, Ripenhard twisted his body. The thick iron chains binding him, rope could no longer hold Ripenhard's brute strength, shattered, freeing his arms. Ripenhard looked at his arms in a daze, noticing a faint golden aura swirling around his sturdy muscles. Gerard laughed heartily, patting Ripenhard on the shoulder without hiding his joy. "Congratulations, my disciple. You have finally awakened your aura." Aura, the life force. A martial artist who has reached a certain realm can feel the energy of the world, absorbing it into their body to transform it into their own strength. This power, also known as aura, enhances the body to the point where it can smash rocks and leap over walls with superhuman strength. Additionally, depending on how the aura is utilized, it can regenerate the body or be projected as a long-range attack, exhibiting magical capabilities. The continent is vast, and countless warriors dedicate themselves to martial pursuits. Yet, among them, only 1 in 10,000 reaches the realm of manipulating aura. Even the most basic aura manipulation, simply using aura to enhance one's physical capabilities, could easily earn someone the treatment of a knight commander in a small nation. Such is the rarity and power of an aura user. My goodness, is this the legendary aura I've heard so much about? Ripenhard himself could hardly believe it, repeatedly scanning his entire body in awe. Even the sword Saint Cyrus was said to have awakened his aura in his late 20s, an achievement considered unprecedented on the continent and worthy of being hailed as a genius. And yet, Ripenhard, not even 20, had awakened his aura? But Gerard acted as if it was to be expected. Why so surprised? With our Jim Unbreakable's training method, this level of achievement is only natural. I was already thinking it was about time. Indeed, there wouldn't be such an arduous training method if it weren't effective. Nodding in silent agreement, suddenly, Gerard struck Ripenhard's abdomen with a steel mace he was holding. Ripenhard simply stared as the blow that could shatter rocks hammered his abs. There was definitely an impact, but Gerard grinned. "How is it? It doesn't hurt anymore, does it?" "Yes, master," Ripenhard replied in a daze. Wow, it seems all the hardships were worth it. The hardships he had endured flashed through his mind like a lantern slide. The thought that such rewards could be earned made the hellish ordeal seem worthwhile. Gerard had said that he would be thankful to his master once he reached this realm, and it seemed there was truth in his words after all. Gerard proudly shrugged his shoulders. By striking the entire body to strengthen it, while simultaneously stimulating the survival instinct, a strong will to live enhances one's vitality, and this increased strength eventually manifests as aura. Though the process is painful, there is no more efficient method in the continent to awaken aura. So, my disciple, do you now understand the excellence of this training method? Gerard threw the steel mace onto the ground. There was no need for it anymore. It's about time to finish the physical conditioning training. Finally, the painful days were over. Ripenhard smiled with joy. He was happy to have awakened his aura, but even happier at the thought that he would no longer be hit. Gerard smiled broadly. Let's move on to the next stage. It's time for skill training. Now I'll finally learn some proper martial arts. Then, I can leave the mountain soon, right? For these 2 years, he had done nothing but build muscle and get hit. He hadn't learned a single proper punch or kick. Ripenhard asked eagerly, "What is skill training, master?" Gerard grinned and raised his fist. "Free sparring with me?" Lost for words, Ripenhard looked up at his master's fists. Those 2 fists, reminiscent of a dwarf-made steel hammer, were shimmering with a dazzling golden aura. They looked so brilliantly different in quality compared to Ripenhard's faint aura. How much would it hurt to be hit by that? Soon, Ripenhard would feel the answer himself. Aya. Feeling Gerard's loving strikes diving into his weak spots, Ripenhard was in despair. The hell filled with love had not ended. It had just begun. In the southern part of the Vasily kingdom, deep within the Raked Mountains, lies rugged terrain. Beneath a cliff that looks as if it were cut sharply, a waterfall cascaded down into a pond below, creating a loud noise of water. Next to the water's edge, where the noise and spray of water merge, a robust young man was throwing punches into the air. With a simple shout, his fist seemed to tear through the air, followed by a rapid succession of punches. The speed of the punches was so fast that afterimages remained, and the movements were flawless. If there had been an opponent, they would have been forced to despair at how the young man's punches occupied every direction flawlessly. Then, kicks, spinning kicks, and thrusts followed in basic movements. The young man's limbs teared through the air as he continuously stepped, his movements becoming more complex. The intricacies of these movements, which involved pulling, pushing, raising, and sweeping, contained exquisite techniques that any martial artist would admire. The punches and kicks split the air, and just the wind pressure alone caused the wind to whirl. The roaring sound of the wind filled the clearing. After a while, the young man, who had been invested in shadow fighting, a practice method of imagining an imaginary enemy in the air, finally stopped his movements. Standing in place, he turned his head towards the cliff with his fist clenched. A dazzling golden aura began to ripple and flow out from his fist. The young man took a deep breath. His whole body's muscles twitched and swelled. In that state, he pulled his fist back and lowered his stance. The pose resembled a beast about to pounce on its prey, and the young man muttered softly, "Calamity Horn?" Tearing through the atmosphere, the young man's entire body lunged towards the cliff. The golden fist stretched out, creating dazzling waves of light. The fist continuously tore through the air, and waves of light spread out continuously. Surrounded by 3 waves of light, the young man drove his fist into the cliff. With a loud explosion, the atmosphere vibrated, and a huge crater was formed in the cliff, looking as if a meteorite had struck. The diameter seemed to be well over 10 meters. Then, the waves of light converged towards the fist. The first, second, and third waves condensed into a single point, transforming into a destructive force. The condensed aura's waves continuously pounded on the cliff. The surroundings shook as if an earthquake had occurred, dust billowing up and countless fragments scattering in every direction. Moments later, where the dust settled, a massive cave now gaped open, clearly not there just 3 seconds before. The cliff hadn't even collapsed, owing to the concentrated nature of the destructive force that had pierced through it. The scene was too ghastly to be the work of a mere human fist. Yet, the very person who wrought this miracle seemed unsatisfied. The young man, catching his breath and looking at the cliff, suddenly sighed deeply. Is triple layering still my limit? It feels like I could go a bit further if I just tried a bit harder. The youth, embodying the perfect form of a warrior from head to toe, was Ripenhard, who had reincarnated 5 years ago and was now 21 years old. Having awakened his aura 3 years ago, Ripenhard had been reluctantly following the path of the warrior and had gradually become accustomed to life in the mountains. Gerard, his master, no longer treated his disciple as harshly as before. Or, to be precise, while the intensity of his training remained the same, Ripenhard had become robust enough to endure it fairly well. If I could refine my calamity horn to a 4-layered stack, I might finally be able to leave this place, ugh. Stretching slowly to loosen his muscles, Ripenhard muttered discontentedly. Jim Unbreakable's ultimate secret technique, Calamity Horn. A secret martial technique that concentrates all the body's strength into one point, transforming it into destructive power. The technique, named Calamity Horn because its aura ripples converge like a horn, was extremely difficult, only possible for those who fully comprehend the martial arts of Jim Unbreakable. Ultimately, achieving a 9-layer stack, capable of killing even gods, is a fearsome feat. Teslan in his memories could only manage up to a 7-layer stack, and even the current king of martial arts, Gerard, had only mastered up to an 8-layer stack. This technique truly represented the pinnacle of the martial path that Jim Unbreakable aspired to reach. And Master said he won't allow me to descend the mountain until I can perform at least a 4-layer stack. With a clear goal in sight, Ripenhard committed himself more actively to training. Seeing his disciple's changed attitude, Gerard didn't stick to him as closely as before and significantly increased the time for personal training. Currently, he had left Rupenhard to train alone while he went down to the village to replenish their supplies. Observing the position of the sun, Rupenhard estimated the time of the day. It's been a while since he went down to the village. Perhaps he intends to leisurely enjoy a drink? Previously, Gerard would not even go down to the village. Instead, he would spend a considerable amount of money to have supplies delivered all the way to these deep mountains. He had to keep watch 24 hours a day, as there was always the chance of his disciple escaping. Moreover, the volume of supplies needed for the disciple's training was enormous, requiring several carts for transportation. No matter how strong and well-built Gerard was, it was not feasible for him to carry it all by himself. Though it was possible, it wouldn't look good. However, now that Rupenhard's physique had reached a new level, he no longer needed the recovery baths, nor did he need to replenish his spent energy with an absurd amount of food thanks to his awakened aura. Just buying a moderate amount of food supplies was enough, so Gerard had been personally going to the village for supplies lately. I would have seen this as an opportunity to escape before, but... Suddenly, Rupenhard smirked bitterly. He no longer thought about escaping. Having endured so far, it felt unjust to escape. He wanted to be fully recognized for his efforts and then descend the mountain. Anyway, having fully stretched, Rupenhard dusted off his hands and feet and walked towards the edge of the clearing. Today's physical training ends here. Though he was at the last juncture on his way to descending the mountain, he was not in a hurry. Be it martial arts or magic, it's all the same. Don't rush, don't slack. Hadn't his master said the same? That in the end, all things are alike, and that diligently and steadily working hard is actually the shortcut. It seems a bit rich coming from the gym Unbreakable, known for its brutal training method of awakening aura by beating someone to the brink of death. Climbing onto a rock, Rupenhard casually brushed off the dust and sat down in a lotus position. Closing his eyes, he murmured to himself. As much as martial arts are important, one cannot neglect magic either. With his eyes closed, Rupenhard delved into meditation. After being reborn, he spent 2 years being beaten to unconsciousness, without a moment to revive the magic of his past life. However, after awakening his aura, he finally had some personal time to simultaneously practice magic. Sigh. Taking a deep breath, he slowly submerged into the depths of his mind, gradually recalling the realms of all the magic he had learned in his past life, that grand knowledge. In truth, human memory is not entirely reliable. Especially since this body does not possess the brain of Rupenhard, renowned across the continent for his unparalleled memory. Moreover, for the first 2 years, he was too preoccupied with being beaten to even think about making records. There was no such thing as a book to record in either. To transcribe his vast knowledge of magic, which would fill at least 10 volumes, would require more than an entire library. It would be normal to have forgotten memories of a past life by now. Ooh. With a simple deep breath, memories of Rupenhard's past life flashed through his mind like a flashback. What is a flashback? It refers to when, at the moment of death, one's entire past flashes before their eyes in a panoramic view. And Rupenhard, over the past 5 years, had seen this flashback countless times. How many times had he nearly died? Every day was a struggle on the brink of death. Seeing the flashback so often, he gradually became adept at it. Consequently, Rupenhard developed a new, somewhat bizarre ability. He had reached the point where he could artificially see a flashback. This was a serendipitous result of a soul imbued with magical enlightenment, which even the original Teslan did not possess, and a muscular body that had survived countless brushes with death. He could artificially unfold a flashback in his mind and contemplate his past. From there, he would extract knowledge of magic, as if pulling books off a shelf in a library and carefully examining them. Suddenly, Rupenhard raised his hand and stirred the air. A spell softly flowed from his mouth. Delfer la Stellan, I become a bullet that grasps the void to strike my enemy. The catalyst for the magic he was casting now was air, so there was no need for preparation. After forming the somatic gestures continuously for about 20 seconds and barely completing the incantation, Rupenhard extended his hand forward and shouted the activation word. Arrow bullet. A bullet of wind flew and hit a tree across the way. Yes, it just hit. It didn't break or snap, the tree just made a puff sound and shook slightly. Looking at the slightly shaking tree, Rupenhard clicked his tongue. This is. I remember all the magic, but my body can't keep up. Rupenhard in Teslan's body lamented the limitations of his magical powers and intellect. Despite possessing knowledge and understanding, he struggled to accumulate magical energy, and his spellcasting speed had significantly decreased. A basic first circle spell, Arrow Bullet, now took him at least 20 seconds to cast, and its power was insufficient, barely more effective than a strong adult throwing pebbles. Ah, can this blockhead Teslan truly become a mage? He sighed. However, Ripenhard wasn't disheartened. Having been the strongest mage in his past life, he had already thought of several solutions to his predicament. The issue was that he needed to descend the mountain first. I must complete the quadruple stack to gain master's approval, Ripenhard muttered, naturally referring to Gerard as his master. Although their master-disciple relationship had formed under complicated circumstances, Gerard had indeed trained him and shared the secrets of great martial arts, making him worthy of the title. Despite the hardships, Ripenhard's training under Gerard continued, filled with extreme and bizarre methods of toughening up, including being thrown into ice-cold water in the middle of winter, dropped off cliffs, roasted over a campfire, and even thrown into a bear's den with his limbs bound. Gerard cherished his disciple, going to lengths that seemed nearly demonic in their intensity, regretting only the lack of a nearby volcano for lava training. Really, it's a miracle I survived. No wonder the legendary technique known as artificial flashback came to be. With a bitter smile, Ripenhard continued to practice his magic. Limited by his low magical power to only basic spells for now, he was content, knowing that maintaining his magical sense would eventually lead him back to his former glory. Della di Piena, stream of light, deceive those eyes. In the quiet of the mountains, his chant for a spell echoed softly. After completing his magical casting practice and while immersed in meditation to accumulate magical power, something caught his attention. Ha! Ripenhard suddenly opened one eye. He sensed something moving rapidly beyond the forest. About 100 meters away? It was somewhat melancholic that, as a mage, he was sensing his opponent through instinct. However, he continued to focus his mind. This presence isn't human. Nor was it a wild animal. It was definitely the presence of a being running on two legs through the forest. Ripenhard looked towards the source of the sensation with curious eyes. Since his reincarnation, this was the first time he was meeting an outsider other than Gerard. It was impossible not to be curious. Soon after, something abruptly popped out of the forest. It had a stature of about 160 centimeters, a flat nose, bulging eyes, and protruding teeth that came into view. It was a face that would frighten humans, but to him, it was all too familiar. An orc? A small orc with green skin and roughly grown gray hair rushed out of the forest, glaring at him. The orc, upon seeing Ripenhard, seemed flustered and raised its rusty sword. Krurkaka lakata kara. The orc's face was filled with hostility. Ripenhard inadvertently clicked his tongue at its small and skinny appearance. It seems to be just a boy. Orcs are usually about the same height as humans. If it's that size, probably around 3 or 4 years old. Orcs, a warrior race, reach adulthood at 5 years old, and their youth lasts long, so his age seems about right. Ripenhard observed the orc boy silently with interest. In fact, when compared to Ripenhard himself, saying the orc boy was small and skinny was relative. The body of this orc boy was not ordinary. His entire body was well trained and covered in scars, indicating he was a warrior who had experienced many battles. Even among orcs known for their bravery, having such a physique at that age indicated he possessed significant warrior potential. Once again, comparative evaluation can be quite frightening. Did he escape from an arena? The practice of raising orcs as gladiators to fight to the death for entertainment and betting was widespread across the continent. It seemed like this orc boy might be in such a situation. Because he didn't show any reaction and just stared at him, the orc boy's demeanor slightly softened. He lowered his sword a bit, but still remained on high alert. The orc boy then spoke to Ripenhard with a cold voice. Human. You, ignore me. Then, won't kill you. As memories of his past life surfaced, Ripenhard found amusement in the situation. If it had been a human, they would have likely resorted to violence without a second thought. Ah, such a noble race that avoids unnecessary killing even in this situation. He glanced beyond the forest. Though not visible, he could definitely sense a group of armed individuals fervently rushing in their direction. Are they after this boy? Ripenhard cleared his throat for a moment, then let out a growling scream. Kraroke, Karol Talcata? It was Orcish. Given the orc's vocal structure differs from humans, to most humans it would sound like growling. But the meaning was different. Young orc, are you being chased? A spark of interest appeared in the orc boy's eyes. The boy responded in Orcish. How does a human speak the blessed language? Ripenhard briefly replied. I had connections. In his previous life, reigning as the Demon King, he knew the languages of orcs, elves, trolls, dwarves, as well as those of ogres, goblins, and gnolls. He could pronounce Orcish as if it were his native tongue. The orc boy seemed surprised by Ripenhard's fluent Orcish. With a noticeably softened tone, he murmured. A blessed connection, indeed. As you say, I am being pursued. I want to help you. The orc boy widened his eyes, then shook his head in refusal, indicating his objection. Ripenhard, puzzled, asked, "Do you not trust me? Or do you mean you won't accept help from a human?" "That's not it. One who knows the blessed language is like a brother to me. I can feel the sincerity of your goodwill in my soul. How could I possibly put such a brother in danger because of my situation?" Ripenhard grew increasingly fond of the orc boy. Humans might look at the orcs, who seem only to growl, and deride them as barbaric and beast-like. However, their vocabulary is not much different from that of humans. It's just that their language is rich in tones, and the meaning changes with long and short sounds, making it seem like simple noises to humans. In fact, orcs, who provide equal educational opportunities to all tribe members, often possess a richer vocabulary than less educated humans. Moreover, this boy among the orcs was using a particularly intellectual tone. Was he born into a good lineage? "I have the ability to help you. And I will not be harmed. Trust me." Ripenhard's confident demeanor shook the expression of the orc boy. Ultimately, the boy nodded. His manner of speech promptly changed. "I shall accept your kindness, benefactor." Ripenhard immediately cast a veil of darkness. Though it was a simple first circle spell that summoned darkness to obscure vision, casting it in a deeply shadowed area made hiding an orc boy trivial. After spreading a veil of darkness over the cave they had just made below the cliff, Ripenhard gestured to the boy. "Hide inside this. My magic will conceal your traces." The orc boy, unable to hide his surprise, asked. He was even more astonished now than when Ripenhard had spoken in Orcish. "You are a mage, benefactor? Is it so strange that I am a mage? With that body?" Indeed, no one would think of Ripenhard, standing at 185 centimeters tall with his body packed with muscles, as a mage. Ripenhard chuckled and continued to gesture towards the darkness. The momentarily baffled orc boy soon relaxed his expression and stepped into the veil. "Then I gratefully accept your kindness." Immersing himself in the darkness of the veil, the orc boy suddenly let out a chuckle. He joked with Ripenhard. "Come to think of it, there seems to be a similar story in human fairy tales. Sadly, I don't know about places where elves bathe, do you?" Ripenhard, smiling back, waved his hand dismissively. "No need for that. Just go hide now." Truly, his intellectual level was quite high. Even in a dire situation, his pride showed, and he even made jokes after accepting the other's kindness. Watching the orc boy disappear into the darkness, Ripenhard smiled contentedly. Then, he climbed back atop the rock and pretended as if nothing had happened, immersing himself in meditation. Shortly after, a noisy group of men emerged, breaking through the bushes. They were mercenaries affiliated with the arena in Chrome City, located near the Raked Mountains. Their usual duties included managing the arena and occasionally capturing escaped slaves. Now, they were all in a foul mood. They initially thought capturing a mere orc child was a trivial task. However, this lowly orc managed to outsmart them with unusual cunning, evading their pursuit and leading them deep into the mountains, frustrating them to no end. It's frustrating, isn't it? To go through all this trouble just to earn a few silver coins. Bright, the leader of this group, grumbled continuously as he roughly cut through the bushes with his scimitar, shaped like a crescent moon. As they emerged from the bushes into a clearing, they spotted a young man sitting on a rock with his eyes closed. Bright called out in a harsh voice. "Hey! You there! Have you seen an orc brat pass by?" One of his followers snickered and added, "We'll give you a gold coin if you tell us." Bright was startled and turned to scold him. "Hey, what are you talking about?" The price of a young orc was barely 5 gold coins, and they were supposed to calculate their compensation in silver coins, so offering a gold coin would mean making a loss. However, the subordinate seemed unconcerned. "Who said anything about actually giving it? We just need the information, and then we can ignore him." "Ah, right. Heh, heh, heh." Their conversation slightly irritated Ripenhard. Bright and his group, feeling secure in the distance, murmured among themselves, not realizing that Ripenhard, whose hearing had developed to an elf-like level, could hear every word accurately. Ripenhard responded indifferently. "I don't know anything." Bright looked at Ripenhard suspiciously. The tracks clearly showed that the young orc had fled in this direction. The footprints were very clear. But he says he doesn't know? Bright examined the footprints again. It seemed the footprints led to a creek below a waterfall, and beyond that, there was a cave that seemed perfect for hiding. Bright smirked. "Over there. Let's go." Inwardly, Ripenhard clicked his tongue. I forgot about the footprints. Back when he used magic, high-level spells would automatically erase any traces or footprints, so it was a mistake. Ripenhard quickly positioned himself in front of them. "This is my dwelling. I cannot allow you to enter without permission." Bright's anger flared at the audacity of this mountain bumpkin blocking his way. Is this brat insane? Only then did Bright take a closer look at Repenhard. He hadn't noticed before, but on a closer look, the young man was quite well built. In fact, not just quite, but extremely well built, though unfortunately, Bright lacked the discernment to recognize it fully. At any rate, it was clear from a glance that he was muscular and formidable. Still, there was no reason to fear since there were more than 10 of them against one. Moreover, Repenhard's height was 185 centimeters, not inhumanly large, but tall. Had he been a giant of 2.3 meters like Teslan once was, they might have fled without looking back. But as it stood, he wasn't that imposing. Hey, something's off about this brat, overpower him. If we beat him up, something might come out of it. Or not. What does it matter if they beat up some mountain bumpkin? It's not like there's anyone around to complain. Bright chuckled. He had always enjoyed tormenting the weak, never feeling remorse for causing unwarranted harm to those unrelated to him. These are utterly pitiful guys. As Repenhard frowned, the subordinates, swords still in their sheaths, approached him. They taunted him further. Hey, kid. Stop messing around and move aside, will you? Kid, you have a nice body, don't you? Well, no matter how strong you are, a sword strike is the same for everyone. Watching the mercenaries approach mockingly, Repenhard clenched his fist, then relaxed it. He had thought about giving them a light punch, but then he remembered Gerard's words. Your fists are now lethal weapons. Assume that swinging them at anyone will likely kill them. Indeed, Repenhard had not yet reached the level where he could freely manipulate aura like Gerard. And even without aura, his fists were as good as sledgehammers. So, what do I do, master? You should show mercy to the weak. Thus, Repenhard decided to show mercy. He picked up a branch lying nearby, one that had snapped off due to his earlier training. In the school of Jim Unbreakable, using one's bare fists is stronger than any weapon. To wield a weapon is to show mercy. Of course, the mercenaries did not take it that way. This brat has picked up a stick? Want to have a go? Thinks he's learned something, huh? Repenhard smirked. Suddenly, his tone changed. Don't worry. You won't die from this. And then, a dazzling display of staff technique unfolded. In an instant, countless staffs left afterimages, raining down on the mercenaries' heads. Their smug expressions vanished, replaced by fear. Jim Unbreakable is a martial sect that specializes in the extreme training of unarmed combat techniques, but it is not devoid of weapon skills. The skill in question was the staff technique, which was not developed for the purpose of fighting opponents, but for rigorously training disciples. As such, it lacks any defensive maneuvers and focuses solely on offense. Specifically, it specialized in evenly tempering the opponent's body without missing a single inch. Damn it! Let's attack him all at once. As their comrades were quickly defeated, the others rushed in surprise. Drawing their swords from their sheaths, they aimed to kill by stabbing their weapons forward. As they were mercenaries who fought with their lives on the line for a living, it seemed like they were able to find a gap in Repenhard's defense. After all, it was to be expected with a style of combat that lacked the concept of defense. A mercenary who charged and thrust powerfully at Repenhard's side. However, the steel sword was deflected, whirling away to lodge itself in a distant tree. Watching this, Repenhard smirked bitterly. Ah, is this really a human body? It's mine, but this is too much. From the start, his physique was a shield in itself. There was no need for defense against opponents so weak that they had to wield weapons. It was astonishing for Repenhard himself, but imagine how the opponents felt? Seeing their swords deflected by his side, the mercenaries lost their will to fight. Repenhard generously shared with them the experiences he had personally undergone for 2 years. The woods echoed with their agonizing screams. Repenhard leisurely muttered while moving his hands non-stop. Somehow, he resembled Gerard. Don't worry, you won't die. The remarkable aspect of this staff technique is that it never lets the opponent die. Puff, puff, puff. You won't die. You just won't. Even if muscles were torn, tendons were cut, joints were broken, and bones were smashed, you definitely won't die. Arg. Upon reflection, he thought there might not be a better torture method. He briefly considered using it as a torture technique when the opportunity arose. Once all his comrades were quickly turned into thoroughly tenderized material, Bright finally realized that this young man was no ordinary individual. Ugh, state your name. State my name? From the tone, it seemed he hadn't regained his senses yet. Repenhard swung his stick lightly and moved in front of Bright. Then, he said with a grin, it wouldn't be fair if all your friends ended up like that and you were the only one fine, right? Bright also underwent the unique martial training of Jim Unbreakable. After about a minute, the wooden stick he was using eventually broke. Had he wrapped the stick in aura for protection, it might not have broken so easily, but unfortunately, his aura, specialized for physical strengthening, couldn't be applied to weapons like those of other martial arts. Such is the trade-off in everything. After the beating ended, Bright finally groaned and spoke. "Please, save me." Bright begged incessantly, his mind no longer occupied with the thought of capturing orc slaves. His only thought was to escape this hellish beating. Ripenhard, sensing a deep nostalgia in the scene, smirked and gestured. Scram. This simple word was a lifeline to Bright and his companions. They hurriedly supported each other and limped away from the clearing. Watching the mercenaries leave, Ripenhard licked his lips. This was somewhat fun, beating them. It's a pity it's over. Maybe I should take on disciples and do this properly. Unbeknownst to him, he was already deeply influenced by the philosophy of Jim Unbreakable. As the situation ended, an orc boy emerged from behind the curtain. He didn't hide his shock. Ripenhard's strength as a warrior was beyond his imagination. Placing his hand on his chest, the orc boy expressed his gratitude sincerely. "My benefactor, I will never forget this day for as long as I live. I will surely repay this kindness." Despite the orc's typical tone, which might sound menacing as if vowing revenge, the sincerity was unmistakable. Ripenhard waved his hand dismissively and asked, "It doesn't matter. Do you have a place to go?" The orc boy suddenly looked desolate. "The world belongs to humans, where could I possibly go?" However, his expression soon changed to one of strong will. "Still, the continent is vast, there must be somewhere to lay my head, right? Even if there isn't, I'd rather die wandering than live as a slave." Though dressed shabbily and covered in wounds, with a rusty sword at his side, the orc boy's eyes shone with the pride of a warrior. Ripenhard smiled broadly. "A spirited one, aren't you?" He paused for a moment, then continued. "Beyond the Racket Mountains, to the southeast for about 15 days on foot, lies a nameless wasteland. A place untouched by human footsteps, thus unnamed, the utmost remote area, called the Land of Trials by non-human races." He continued speaking towards the curious orc boy. "Head there. I've heard that orcs live hidden in that place. The Blue Bear tribe." The expression on the orc boy's face noticeably brightened. Were there still free kinsfolk, not enslaved yet? Filled with hope and joy, the boy suddenly adopted a serious demeanor and bowed his head. Ripenhard, disturbed, asked, "Is it appropriate for a warrior to bow his head so readily? Placing a hand over one's heart is a sign of respect, but bowing the head signifies absolute submission." The boy's tone shifted once again. "You have saved me and opened a new path for me. Now, you are my mentor, and should the opportunity arise, I will take up arms for you." In orc culture, a mentor is a guide in life, a revered figure. It's a concept similar to a human master yet slightly different. Strict obedience is expected, but never at the cost of one's pride, distinguishing it from slavery. Perhaps akin to the relationship between a monarch and his knight? Indeed, it was the highest form of politeness. And it wasn't out of place either. The orc boy asked Ripenhard politely, "May I inquire the name of my benefactor?" "I am." Ripenhard hesitated for a moment. He had been using the surname Winston, given to him by the Tower of Delphia. However, a new life had unfolded before him. "My name is Ripenhard Wald Antares." In the runic language, Wald Antares means ruler of Antares. He decided then to adopt this as his surname, for that was the path he must walk. Ripenhard Wald Antares. "I shall not forget that name." The orc boy repeated Ripenhard's name in an awkward human pronunciation and then turned to leave. "Well then, farewell. Safe travels." Once decided, a warrior does not hesitate. The orc boy walked away towards the southeast without looking back. Watching his departing figure, Ripenhard suddenly called out, Wait! What is your name?" He realized he had not asked the boy's name. As the distance grew, the orc boy shouted back, "I am the son of Crota, inheritor of Lat's mantle. Call me Tacid." Ripenhard's eyes went wide in surprise. No wonder he felt an inexplicable fondness and comfort around him. That boy, he was Tacid? Tacid, one of his 4 heavenly kings, was an orc warrior. He was the chieftain of the Blue Bear tribe and eventually became the great chieftain of all orcs. Ripenhard stared blankly into the forest from which the orc boy had disappeared. The boy was already furiously running towards the other side of the forest. He runs without looking back, towards his kin, along the path he was shown, the path he must take. How curious, fate is. Feeling the power of destiny anew, Ripenhard wondered. Could it be that Teslan in his prime had also met Tacid? But considering his temperament, it seemed unlikely he would have found and helped a young orc. Perhaps Ripenhard's choice of this place had twisted fate. After all, this spot wasn't particularly useful for martial training. He had chosen this clearing next to the waterfall purely for magical training. Anyway, it was curious. Ha ha ha. A smile naturally came to his face. Nostalgia welled up within him. He felt an urge to chase after the boy immediately, to catch up to him. But soon he shook his head. It's not yet time? His loyal subordinate and friend was now following his own destiny. He must not interfere with that path. Fortunately, the Blue Bear tribe that he had directed him to was the original place of Tacid, likely not greatly twisting fate. Feeling the receding presence of Tacid, Repenhard murmured wistfully. Let us meet again someday. My friend, my brother, descendant of the valiant warrior,